Well, good morning and welcome to the podcast, to the Church Office podcast. And we are really looking forward to having Anna on again. People loved having you on and enjoyed hearing about Liverpool. And today we're going to just chat about safeguarding and getting young people involved in our churches in serving and building that into our culture. So we've been working on a document together to encourage churches to kind of think about how they can get young people involved. I know a number of churches are really, really good at doing this. What's your church like, Anna? Your collective like at getting young people involved?
So, due to the sort of the age of where we're at, having sort of started out in 2009 with our original church, and at that point having 2 toddlers, we're only really now just reaching the point where we have a reasonable number of teenagers involved.
Okay.
So we haven't generally had huge numbers of teenagers wanting to volunteer to be involved in things, but that has, just in the last few years, just been something which we've begun to sort of explore the idea that, I remember being younger and just loving playing with the fresh-aged children and things, and so there are the same dynamic with some of the young people we have that have that enthusiasm. It's just how we plug into that and get them involved in things which they would like to be involved with, but also in a way which is going to be appropriate and going to work well for all involved.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because most child protection policies, aren't they, are protecting kids under 18. And, there's a real focus on protecting them. And there are lots of policies in place. And I think our trustees in previous years have taken a decision that actually they didn't allow, kids to serve in, say, a kids ministry or in other areas because they were concerned about other kids maybe abusing other kids and that being on the rise. How do we protect that? How do we protect those relationships that are happening, not just in the classroom, but when they're hanging out outside after church and all those things that are going on. And so the easy default is to go, actually, we won't have them serve and, establish that kind of safe place, essentially. And I understand where they're coming from. And for many years, I've sort of agreed with that. But at the same time, I've seen the effect where young people in our church have got a real desire to want to get involved, want to express their faith, want to kind of serve the church, are starting to kind of see mum and dad going, I'd like to do something like this. And how do we kind of build that in? How do we accommodate that to make sure that everyone is safe? And I guess that's the kind of the conversation today is how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, one of the things which is so key is that if we've got young people who are enthusiastic about wanting to do something in the church, then we really don't want to miss that opportunity because, so much of the rhetoric is that, young people aren't interested in church and, they're falling away and they're choosing not to come. So, to automatically sort of be fearful of the potential for problems that could bring, and then therefore shut it down, just feel like it's a real shame. So the fear is right. It's important that we are really mindful of the risks that having young people involved in ministry could potentially present, but it's all about mitigating those risks and just being really carefully thinking through exactly what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do that in the most appropriate way, keeping everybody safe in the meantime. Because it's not necessarily always going to be the young people wanting to serve with other children. It could be one of our young people. I mean, this is where I'll reveal my own lack of expertise. Technology is not my forte. I'm okay. I get by. I do what I need to do. But anyway, in the era we're in right now, where we're doing live services online and live services in person, we need expertise. And the young people, they know it. They
do.
They're the ones that know how to do it. We've got one young man in our congregation in Liverpool who knows far more about it than many other people in the congregation. And therefore, it's a really good way of encouraging him, using his skills and just actually helping the church as well, tangibly using that well. But that means he's working alongside other people on the PA tech team. So it may not be that he's working with children, but equally they're working with a young person. So it's all of that kind of, it's a bit of a complex situation.
Yeah.
You just need to navigate well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think we've put together a document that's available to download on the church office website, and it's involving young people, and I guess it kind of puts together, I suppose, a discussion paper that says, can we do this? And here's a possibility of a way that we could apply this into our churches. And I know for us at the minute, this is something that I've kind of only just submitted to, to staff, and we've started talking the conversation with one or two trustees that we can then sort of build a bit of momentum and say, actually, should we make this change, and what does that do? So in the document, it just sort of outlines, really what are some of the benefits to young people. And we know that volunteering significantly benefits the individual, doesn't it? It develops gifting and skill. We know it's really good for them. We know it's really good for the church. I love the fact that you could have different generations serving together. There's something quite exciting about that. And there's huge benefits to the church, like you're saying about this young person who's good with tech. We need people who are tech-minded. We need people who are creative, films, graphics, artwork, all this kind of stuff is just, it's almost like a walk in the park for some young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
and we need those things going forward, don't we? Because it's essential kind of to pass on or to give room to the next generation to how are we going to make this gospel get out to that age group? How are we going to reach this age group with the good news of Jesus? And we need people involved in that. And it starts earlier, doesn't it, than just 16 to 18. It starts much younger.
Now, that's it. There's real potential for them being much younger and starting out.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed when we started putting this together was that lots of organisations will take people at 14 to kind of individually serve on their own, and there are lots of different voluntary organisations that that's the kind of age where they go, right, there's a change there, and we can begin to kind of appoint young people into roles. And one of the things that we put in the document was actually maybe there's a way that actually young people could serve alongside their parents. So yes, that we want to protect them, and we don't necessarily want to send them into situations where they're on their own, they don't know other people in the church and serving in a role. But is there a way that actually if mum's serving on generations and their daughter's got a real interest, that they can actually tag team together and go and serve together, with the parent being sort of fully responsible, I suppose, for the child in the classroom?
Yeah, and I think that was a really interesting idea, because that wasn't something that we necessarily sort of landed on as being a solution to the potential issue. But it's a really good sort of idea to have parental responsibility still maintained, but also in a way that allows the young person to have a bit more freedom than perhaps they would have done before, because they are still involved in serving. But it means that the protection of that young person, the protection of their safe being is still involved, with the parental oversight being there as well. So it's a really interesting idea, and way of making that work.
Yeah, and I know not all kids and parents are going to have the same interests, and you're going to have different things going on like that. Is mum going to want to serve on the camera team doing media? Well, maybe we can give room to that, or
it might be that there's some sort of way of having, a buddy system or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
But some sort of, intentional discussion where somebody else is willing to be that person's almost mentor, with parental permission given. And the parents do need to be involved in at every stage in all of these sorts of discussions and plans, because they ultimately need to be assured that the church is going to do everything they can to protect their child, but also to give them opportunities to really develop their skills and their integration into the church life.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, I think it's great. And what I've seen other churches do, I guess, which we're kind of questioning, I suppose, is that they've got the young people to kind of sign that they've read the safeguarding policy, get them to sign up to like a worker or helper kind of job description, and everything in the policy, also relates to, we're expecting workers to be able to keep an eye out for kids who might be receiving some kind of abuse, that those signs are there, that we're checking, that we're making sure that these young people are safe when they're in our care. And so they're almost placing quite a big responsibility on the young person when they sign that, to actually understand everything that's in that document. And I think that's a particular challenge going forward. I get the heart to get them involved, but actually the level that we're asking them to work at is far too high.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's so much complexity in the whole issue of safeguarding. It's something which, as adults, on a professional level as a teacher in my previous job, but also in this context with volunteers and adult volunteers, it really takes a lot of time and thought to actually ensure that we are interpreting all the various requirements upon us as an organisation to ensure that safeguarding is done appropriately and done well. To expect, a young person to fully understand what that safeguarding policy is setting out to them and what they're signing up for, particularly to be signing up to be almost taking responsibility for other children. That is really huge. So I think there is a real need there. I think you've come up with a kind of an alternative route, and that idea of having something which is in language that the children, the young people can access, that it's understandable to them, it's in a way which they will be able to really, thought it through, yes, I'm okay with all of that, and yes, I agree to that. And so that idea of making it more appropriate for their age group, I think, is absolutely ideal.
There's two key things, isn't there? What are we asking them to do? So what's the job description? And you're right, not having any responsibility for other children. So if you're serving in a kids ministry as almost like a junior helper, junior volunteer, is that you're in there to get involved in the activity, set a good example, be on hand to help people, but you're not there to take kids to the toilet. You're not there to offer any discipline. You're not there to in almost bring those kind of areas. So the job description is key. And I think we came up with a kind of code of conduct, didn't we, that actually says, can we come up with something that is appropriate to what we're asking them to do for the role, in a way that a parent could work through the document with their child and go, okay, yeah, I can understand this. I agree to this. So the first rule, golden rule, I think we put at the top was, you're never alone. So you're never alone with a child, whether you're in the class or you're outside the class, in the church. That's the kind of golden rule, clear message. It's easy to understand. And then we've gone from there as, okay, well, what other things do we want you to do to ensure that, you act in just an appropriate way? So think about joking, thinking about phone use in the classroom, thinking about all these other areas. And we've put together this kind of code of conduct, which I think is a good starting point, isn't it, for churches if they're thinking about this?
Oh, 100%. And it's something which young people are going to be familiar with the concept of as well. Maybe not in a church context, but most schools now will require pupils to be involved in signing a code of conduct as to how they're expected to behave and interact in a school setting. So it's not like it's an unfamiliar concept to young people either, which I think is really helpful. It's just applying it in this different context of church ministry. And all the different points that you've made are really important. They're all pretty simple, but they're things that perhaps the young people wouldn't necessarily think about. It's so innate to have your phone in your pocket and get your phone out. Those sorts of things just aren't necessarily going to be things that they would realise could create a potential problem for them. And aspects about how they behave and interact with the younger children to ensure that they're not feeling like they're being picked on or made fun of. Because they don't understand it in the same way that they would. When you've got an 8-year-old and a 14-year-old, they are going to have a difference in what they understand as humour or anything else. Really, really key things to just help the young person, but also to help the people they're working with for it to work well.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we can offer the training to the workers and say, mum and dad are going to be in the classroom with their child, they're volunteering, here's their code of conduct, here's what we're asking them to do, and here's what we expect you to not ask them to do other things, so don't take a kid to the toilet. That's not what their job is for. There's a whole lot of training, isn't it, and updating that has to go if we begin to update and introduce these roles into the church. Safeguarding is got to be an ongoing training place anyway, isn't it? Like you're saying, for professionals, it's a hard enough job anyway.
Yes, exactly. And it's constantly evolving and being updated and refined. Rightly so. Things all the time are changing, and society is always going to sort of be evolving in how it interacts. So therefore, we have to ensure that safeguarding measures keep a pace with those changes. But that's where it does become just complex to make sure that we're all at the very least compliant, and if not much better than that, in terms of keeping everybody in our churches safe, whether they're young or old. That's the fundamental importance of it.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Safeguarding isn't always the most exciting topic for people. I did some training a few months ago where somebody sort of reframed it a little bit and just said, actually, we should be viewing safeguarding in a church context as being biblically faithful in ensuring we're safeguarding well. So it's not just about the legislative side of it. It's about making sure that biblically we are being faithful in how we treat and interact with all the people in our churches who could be vulnerable in some way. So, let's get it right. Let's do it as well as we possibly can.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Absolutely right. And, like I've said before, I think you've got to make the connection from policy to the gospel, in the sense that if you want to reach out to the next generation with the gospel, you need a safeguarding policy in place, and implemented correctly. So you can tell young children about the good news of Jesus, and it just shifts it up the list and say, actually, this is a real priority, that we've got to get these things in place, not just to protect the message of the gospel and the opportunity to share it, but also protect those who are serving in our churches, aren't they? Without a policy, we don't protect those who are volunteering as well. So there's a lot of things going on here. And for churches, if you don't have anything in place, then there are charities, there are places you can go and get model policies. There are lots of places you can get training from. And I'd certainly advise anyone to pursue those sort of avenues, really.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the other things that we talk about in the document, which is great, is to appoint a sort of, not just a youth worker, but a volunteer, a young volunteers coordinator. And I've been thinking about that this week and thinking, actually, this could make a real difference, that the young people had a place that they could go and find out about all the roles across the church where they could serve and be supported, yes, by their parents, but also have a coordinator who could offer some support and training as well to young people. What were your thoughts on that? Yeah,
it's a really good idea to have someone that is visible and known as that's the person you need to speak to. I think with all aspects of church service, if you know who you need to go and speak to and it's made clear, then you're more likely to have people really wanting to get involved and buying into that idea. If you're not quite sure who you need to speak to get to serve on a specific team area, then the likelihood is you'll go home again that Sunday and forget about it till the Sunday after, and then So actually, if you've got that person in place who the young people know and the families know, that's the person to go and have a conversation with about how does it work, what's involved, what safeguards have you got in place, what are the benefits of it, just those questions that people are likely to have. And you have someone that's hot on that, that really knows and has a passion for that, then that's going to really help
massively,
recruit people in a really positive way, because they're going to really want to get involved if you're being told enthusiastically about all the things that are being done to make it work well. It's all about making sure that people get those clear messages, I guess.
Yeah, oh, absolutely right. Yeah, I think it's great. I picture in our church, 10, 15, 20 kids coming together who, sitting around a Domino's, receiving some, code of conduct training from a volunteer coordinator, and then deploying these kids into different roles. I just love the thought of, we've got no young people that are serving on our welcome team. Just think, why have we not adopted this? Wouldn't it be wonderful for families to be there welcoming folk? Things like communion, we've never got the kids involved in distributing communion, and it'd be a really simple and brilliant way to get them involved, and actually then teaching them what's happening, why it's happening, the biblical perspective about communion as we go along as well. Totally. So there's just so many areas, isn't there, that you can actually think, right, we could actually deploy young people into.
Yeah. And in terms of, on a lighter note with that, but in terms of actually getting young people involved and enthusiastic about something, bringing Domino's or other food stuff is always a good idea.
Yeah, we can bring some sweets along the way. I'm sure everyone would love that. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So the document is available on the church office website. Download it, and it might be that you listen to this podcast and think, where do I go with this? It might be a discussion with your elder. It might be a discussion with your trustee. It might be a discussion with your staff member, and the paper's there to use for people who want to put forward this idea, who would like to see some change in their church. And we'll keep you posted on how it goes in our church. I know a few trustees have looked at it over the weekend for me and saying, oh, what about this? What about that? And I think the document answers all those questions. But I think one of the other questions they're asking is about DBS checks. And I think you have to be 16, don't you, in order to get a DBS check. So there are some things like that we need to think about as well.
Yeah, no, DBS checks are really important. But like you say, the lower age limit on those does make that less applicable in this context. But equally, hopefully there's ways to make it work until that point can be reached, and then move it into the more adult realm as they reach the older teen years.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. And, there might be occasions where, one of the, 12-year-old wants to serve on the camera team. Maybe it's appropriate for the camera team to chat to them and say, look, we want to give young people the opportunity. Would you all be DBS checked? Where it might not necessarily be a role that you would check for, because they're not directly working with kids in the same way. But it's worth thinking about that as well. Well, we had a few technical issues, but we're back. We were talking about DBS checks, and young people say if they're serving with a parent in a kids ministry, it's easy because all the staff and workers in those areas are DBS checked. But if you're going to go wider with a young person, say a tech team or a camera, or maybe working on a kind of creative side of things, then maybe it's worth considering, DBS checking some of those that are working with a young person in that context. And maybe that's a conversation to have.
Yeah, it's one of the conversations I've been having with our team in Liverpool more recently, actually, is just actually where do we sit in terms of ensuring that we are doing the best we possibly can in terms of safeguarding. So the example I gave earlier about a young lad helping out with the tech team, that really does mean that anybody that's working alongside him on the technical team should be DBS checked, because he is still a young person, age 15. He is of an age where he would be needing to have that protection. So therefore, the tech team really should be going through that process of safeguarding training and having the DBS checks done. And I think my view at the moment, as much as this does create significant administration, is that perhaps we need to consider in churches where you do have teams of people serving in different ways. You mentioned welcome before, technical side, musicians, those sorts of things, where you might well bring on young people as they become willing and able to serve in those ways. But also you might have people who are serving in those teams as adults who, for various different reasons, could be classed as vulnerable in some way. I think that the traditional view of safeguarding children and vulnerable adults is often a bit of an assumption that vulnerable adults are people who have specific needs themselves. But what's happened in recent times, really, I think it's become clearer that adults can become vulnerable for a whole host of reasons. And they might only be vulnerable for a certain season, where maybe mental health is difficult or something else has happened in their life, which makes them puts them in a more vulnerable position. But with that in mind, it's for me a little bit of a discussion going on about whether we move to having everybody serving on a team in a church context undergoing safeguarding training and having a DBS check, just to ensure that we are trying to take a beyond reproach approach to it, as opposed to necessarily just ensuring that we're compliant. And that, like I say, that does have administration issue attached to it. It does have cost issues attached to it. But I think it's a discussion that's worth having with leadership teams in churches to make sure that everybody is aware of why safeguarding is important and how to go about it in a way which works best for everybody in the individual context you're in.
No, absolutely right. I think it's great. And I think we started the conversation by talking about culture, isn't it? And it isn't just, getting a few families or a few people involved, but actually it's a whole culture. So how can we serve one another? And by serving one another, it means getting a DBS check where you think, well, maybe I don't need one because I'm doing tech. But actually, by you having one will enable a young person to get involved in the team, which makes this generational, which means that we can pass the gospel on to the next generation. So there are all these little links that we want to consider and build a culture than, just functional, just making everything functional and easy for ourselves. But it is going to create some work, isn't it? It's going to add things to our list each week.
We'll have a list though. We'll have those lists.
Those lists, we never get to the end of those lists anyway. So what's another item on there, which is great.
Exactly.
No, it's good. Well, do you know what? It's been really, really interesting discussion. And I hope listeners have found it and maybe it's provoked them to think more differently about getting young people involved. And are there ways that we can do? And I know we can certainly give an update from our church and how it's going, and we'll hear an update from Anna as well. But again, please send in your questions. We're not experts in safeguarding, but we want to try and facilitate young people to serve in churches. We want to be passionate about that. So please send your questions in, and if we can't answer them, then we will refer them to others. We can bring an expert in who offers safeguarding training all the time. We've got contacts and links to those people, and if it's been a while since you've been on any safeguarding training, then please hear our message before, just how important it is, not just to protect young people, but the link to the gospel and ensuring that we pass on the gospel to the next generation to enable us to do that. So Anna, again, it's so lovely to talk to you, full of lots of experience, not just like from operations, but also your teaching, which comes into play here as well. So grateful for your time and wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's great. I think it'd be great. And if there's anything else that you want to talk about on the podcast, we'd love to get you involved. And just thrilled that, kind of through our conversations, our churches will link together and partner together in different ways. And I love the fact that we're just about the same thing. And
absolutely.
Enabling the gospel, enabling and serving our pastors to do a great job. So again, thank you for that. Thank you for those who are listening to the podcast. We really appreciate your support and your encouragement. Just thrilled by the numbers, and we do hope today's conversation is a blessing to you. All right, well, take care, and we'll speak to you soon.